Hey everyone, back with Mindrolling, and today this is Anthony Bossis, Tony, who is a mutual friend of someone you know, Ramesh Wardas. You guys out there, you know how he co-writes Ram Dass's books and is in all these retreats we do, etc. So, and I guess a shout out to Clara, right? Another mutual. Clara Hendon, and thank you for hooking us up. So Tony is someone who is on the front lines of the experiments that are going on today with entheogens, psychedelics, to help people with PTSD, cancer, addiction, etc. So you know what, Tony? First thing is to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
I'm very lucky.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's real grace that you become an instrument for this. And Tony is at what? NYU, right?
Yeah. NYU School of Medicine.
Okay, great. But I want to go just to get to know you. This is the first time we're meeting. I kind of want to just go back to you're a teenager. This is how Mindrolling started, actually. I started with a partner of mine named David Silver. And the first things we did was we got to the core of what it was that helped transform us out of the horrid pain and suffering and depression. You know, for me, it was starting with like Bob Dylan, right? Back then, oh, somebody knows that there's pain and depression and a horrible thing going on. I'm not the only one. So, yeah, how did you come through this knowing there was a path possible for you to be beyond mind, ego, and emotions and all that?
Yeah, well, Dylan was part of that path as well.
Yeah, good. Oh, you know what? I have to say this. It's crazy, but I don't know if you saw Rolling Thunder Review, which is a film by Martin Scorsese that is on when Dylan went out in 1975 and he went out in Whiteface. It is a staggering. The film is great because it's Scorsese, but Dylan he redeemed every bullshit thing that he did after that.
Right.
Like Elvis, belts at Madison Square Gardens, changing the melodies and the structure of the song to kill you. He killed me.
So here, we're on the same page. Here we go. So not only have I seen it, a good friend of mine is Amir Barlev, who had produced the recent Grateful Dead movie. And he provided me with a ticket to the VIP showing with Scorsese at Lincoln Center about a month ago.
Oh.
And we saw the world premiere with Scorsese and much of the crew who was still alive. And it is incredible. And I went home and for about a week watched it every morning on my Netflix, especially the music pieces. To the point my wife said, "Why every morning are you watching those clips of Dylan?" Because that's the gold. And you're right, that was a dividing point, and that was an incredible slice of incredibility. So that is something that was beautiful.
Yeah, it was. The commitment and the authenticity, the charisma, and of course the words, the stories, they all came together. Can't more highly recommend that, everybody out there listening.
Okay. I agree, and if you can catch it on the big screen, if it's gone, then watch it 10 times in a row on Netflix. A sweet part of that, we could spend a whole hour just seeing Dylan and the sweet part of that movie was the ending when Allen Ginsberg does that prayer. So the movie's about this incredible road tour they're all on with Joan Baez and
Joni Mitchell was there. I mean,
Sam Shepard. And at the end of the film and the end of the tour, Allen Ginsberg comes on and there's a beautiful prayer to create your own redemption, find your beauty, and send it out into the universe. I'm paraphrasing the great Ginsberg. And the movie ends with another rendition with Bob and singing a song. So great. I'm glad you mentioned that. We can stop right there. We're done.
Actually, now that you mentioned Allen Ginsberg, that was another. Those two were in parallel for me to help set off my chance a little bit of freedom from where I was at. So tell me about you. Tell us.
Yeah, great. And that's a great segue because I think for many of us of a certain age, and above 60, and for many of us younger, that stuff was important, right? That music, those words, and the books we found liberated us, began that liberation. I was joking recently with some when I was giving a talk that those were the days we stared at album covers for hours on end. We stared at the album, right? Not only played it, you looked at the cover, Sergeant Pepper, or for hours, and books. We'd stare at book covers for hours. So that seems to have slipped
There
from
was some other reasoning around that, but
right, right. So my teen years, that's a great way to start. Well, like many of us, even to go back a little earlier, that might dovetail to the work I do with end of life patients. This may not be related, but it's hard to deny that it is. As a kid, like many of us, I had this death terror. I would lie in bed and try to imagine what eternity was like after I died. It's not an uncommon thing for kids to have. And I would just kind of do this thing in my head forever and ever and ever. It went on for a number of minutes where it just became existential terror, right? And then I learned a technique somehow where I would say to myself as a 7-year-old, however old I was, 8, 9, where was I before I was born? And that kind of cut the terror.
That's great
Um,
mantra.
yeah, but that led kind of a path. And I grew up in a Greek American Orthodox family. That was a really mystical tradition, the Eastern Orthodox Christian church. And I'm still very close to the leadership and people within the church. It's quite a mystical lineage of Christianity that still persists. And like many of us in my teens and really into college, uh, came across the books, of course, of Ram Dass and other mainly Zen Buddhist texts and lineage from my own path and a lot of Vedanta. And then, linking to this work, came across in the early 20s the research on psychedelics that was done back in the 50s and 60s, and began to read Huxley and Watts and the whole group of incredible writings. And that had really jolted me. I had been already fascinated by mystical experience. What is that experience at the core of all religions? And continue to study or try to comparative religion or comparative mysticism. And then comes across this way that we could have that potentially with the right set and setting through these medicines. And they've been doing that for thousands of years. Now, this is by this time, the late 70s, early 80s. And I made a horrible career move thinking I want to do psychedelic research. Well, there wasn't anything happening. But eventually it turned out. So sometimes in life, if you put your intention in the right direction, maybe you get lucky and 30, 40 years later, it came around.
A little patience helps too there.
Man. So that's part of it. I began, as many of us did, with TM back in those days. Probably because I thought it was important, probably because George Harrison did it. And that kicked open a path of course, meditation. And ever since, that was a big opening period. And those three paths of Vedanta and Zen and Christian mysticism remain important. And I'm very grateful, very lucky to be doing this work that does generate those experiences. And I will speak about it today, how these medicines can generate those mystical experiences that we see at the mystic core of the world religions. And that additionally, we'll get into this in detail, we see have therapeutic value along a number of clinical applications. The one I'm most interested in is people is dying. How do we die well without anxiety? So I kind of can loop back to my being in bed at age whatever it was, thinking, how do I even absorb or understand that? And these medicines have certainly shown a way out. So um, that's kind of a brief beginning.
So one of these things I took a look at, which of course really interested me. Oh, I should say right from the get-go, you said in a TED talk, we have to, something like this, we have to separate out the cultural frenzy of the 60s with this rigorous scientific approach, right? Does that ring?
Yeah.
I felt deprecated there. Okay. Yeah, that cultural frenzy we had. First of all, it was an incredible amount of fun. Okay, and we
Mhm.
can't forget about fun.
Right.
And and as Ram Dass himself says, like so many of us, right, went through that whole thing, and then many of us, meaning people who are now more firmly ensconced in meditative practices, much more than using psychedelics. As a result of going to India, and in our case, meeting this particular being, Neem Karoli Baba, the man in the blanket that we talk about all the time. And Ram Dass says, had it not been for the entheogens, had it not been for the psychedelics, I don't think I would have been quite as prepared to meet somebody that was a nobody,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So the that there's I guess there's two things going on, and you do address this a lot, and that is around that personal mystical experience that happens, and then around the actual effects it can have on people even who have no penchant in that direction and maybe atheist or agnostic, right?
Including atheists, and I will give you a good story later about that.
Yeah, well, I actually let's
But
talk about that.
okay, but I want to answer your question. So
Yeah.
no harm meant to the tens of hundreds of thousands of us who were um, helped by that decade. The point of that, and I still think it's important to say that as we go forward, unfortunately, the public at large, not you, because you're not the public at large, you're a special person who knew that, but they collapsed whatever they think of the 60s, which is usually mythic, and superficial, maybe, not the meaningful experiences we're talking about. And that's one slice, an important slice, but of thousands of years of entheogens being used, going back to ancient Greece and India and Mexico. Um, that's an incredible time. But there's also a lot of stuff that went on social, politically, and culturally that people who are not familiar with entheogens or psychedelics do confuse. And so I tried to separate some of the headlines of the era that aren't so meaningful with the reasons why it was important. And I hope that comes through when I do those comments. Because that era also gave us incredible people like Houston Smith, like Alan Watts, like Ram Dass, um, on and on. And Huxley, we can go on and on, and incredible art and music. So, and then, as you know, there are many people, including many people from contemporary spiritual life and Buddhist and Christian and different lineages, will say that that was the opening, and then began the spiritual practice. So without that, they may not have been able to, as Ram Dass says, to meet somebody who's a nobody. And as Alan Watts famously said, and Ram Dass repeats it often as well, when you get the message, hang up the phone. So I think these experiences were uh, almost birthrights for us. Really, for humans, I think they really are a birthright to have that naturally, or they happen naturally throughout history as well, which we'll talk about. But so that's the point of that comment, for people to separate who are less familiar with it, what they think of the 60s, and the frenzy and the political stuff, and versus the meaning making part of that, which was quite important, especially in this spiritual artistic realm.
Yeah. Um, well, I think it'd be good to just describe a little bit about what the program that you have been
Yeah.
working on, particularly, of course, with end of life and cancer and patients who are facing what most people are quite afraid of,
Right.
which is going through that process.
Yeah, and let me backtrack a minute to just briefly shine a light on the earlier research. So, uh, again, many people aren't aware, and it's quite a rich history that going back to the early 40s, medicines like LSD uh, were being, discovered, and psilocybin a little later on came to the States through a gentleman by the name of Gordon Wasson. But then in the early 60s, throughout the decade, into the mid 70s, there was a large body of psychedelic research, primarily with LSD and DPT, and then somewhat psilocybin. And after these medicines were discovered, the experience, which we call a mystical experience, and I want to define that in a moment, was found to have this incredible clinical benefit on two main populations that grew out of that era. One was addiction, primarily alcoholism. And as many people may know, Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, had many LSD experiences and mystical experiences, thus kind of generating his understanding and teaching that the antidote to addiction was the spiritual experience. And hence the 12 steps kind of came out of that.
Mm.
The other arm that influenced me in a very big way was with people who were dying of cancer. And it was quickly seen through the research at Spring Grove and Stan Groff and Bill Richards and others from the era. And Bill is still around doing great work, that this experience, one session, may generate this mystical experience that seemed to recalibrate fear of death. And so, sadly, the research ended in the early 70s. After in 1970, Nixon signed a congressional act that made these drugs out of the reach of the culture. They were legal, actually, and out of the reach of research, which never in the history of medicine has happened. That a medicine is removed from clinical trials or research with such promise because of a cultural phenomenon. It would be like making opiates now unavailable for medicine because there's an opiate problem in the streets. And for 30 years, nothing happened. Let me quickly define mystical experience, Raghu, because it's to the conversation today. There are a variety of experiences people can have when they take a psychedelic, such as psilocybin, mescaline, LSD, and those are considered what's called the classic hallucinogens. There could be an autobiographical experience, revisiting stages of one's life. There could be aesthetic, visionary, so things look good and sound better. But we found the therapeutic predictor of outcome, of good outcomes, and of profound insight, the things Ramdas speaks about, is this mystical or peak experience. It's defined as only a few criteria. One is unity. The person experiences everything as connected. Transcendence, the sense of transcending this body, even transcending time and place, time and space. And some people pull the lens back so far, so to speak, they can peek beyond birth and death, to what we've seen people talk about. If you're dying of cancer or of anything, and you're aware that the body is beginning to fail, it will soon stop working. We're so attached to the body that the insight many people get, that I think is the recalibrating insight, is that I'm not this body. I might be something more. There might be something more either within me or even outside me and outside biology. Now there's a whole host of thought that maybe consciousness, which we don't know what it is, might be outside biology, what we call non-local. These brains are kind of mediate, tuners that bring it in, which challenges all the assumptions that we've had. That's a main feature. Then the other features are sacredness, profound sense of holiness and wonder, positive emotions, love and gratitude, ineffability, impossible to speak about, but they do a good job. And one is called paradoxicality. People experience that in the awareness we're both in now, that I think we're both in. I'm not sure where you're at, but I think we're both in now, right? Doesn't make sense, but in that state makes perfect sense. Something like, I was dead, but I never felt so much alive. Or I experienced the emptiness of everything that was filled with the everythingness of the universe. And so those are the main kind of features. So that's the mystical experience. So now fast forward 35 years or so, and we're in this incredible reemergence that a lot of your viewers I know about. It's been quite the talk of the town, psychedelics back in the culture. And gratefully, we resumed a number of sites around the world research. And the ones that I'm going to speak about today involves picking up where they left off decades ago. Can we give this medicine, psilocybin, the active ingredient from a mushroom, street language, the magic mushroom, to a person with cancer, with very intense anxiety, or someone who's dying, and measure their effects. And we're happy to report that in 2016, Johns Hopkins, along with our team at NYU, following a prior study at UCLA with Charlie Grove, um, showed that had findings never seen before in the history of medicine, which always sounds strange coming out of my mouth, but it's true.
Mm.
That this one dose, this one session, dramatically reduced anxiety and depression for weeks. 80% reported a tremendous drop going down up to 6 months, and we're still following the ones who are still alive. It also reduced something called demoralization, which is an awful experience associated with end-of-life distress where you feel demoralized, hopeless. It enhanced spiritual well-being, and on and on. And so, and many people reported that one experience as the single most or top 5 most important spiritual and meaningful experiences of their lifetime. And that's found throughout the research, not only in these trials, but with smoking, trials with smoking cessation, with addiction. So that's really fascinating. And I know we'll stay on that part a little bit today. We'll come back and forth to it. That aside from it being powerfully therapeutic in a lot of ways, what appears to be the most robust feature is this mystical experience. And I'm left with this incredible question.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? We're wired for meaning. These aren't drug studies only per se, because these happen naturally throughout time and are the foundations of religion. I mean, as Ram Dass famously says, he gave it to his guru, to Maharaji, and he said, well, I know this place. I've been here before. So we're wired for transcendent experiences. And why is that?
Yeah, let me correct you on that one. I know this place. I've been here before.
Well, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah. No, the reality was there was no experiencer. When I say we were prepared to meet a nobody only by virtue of these entheogens and psychedelics. And that's because we had never met someone that there's no back and forth going on. There's just a one pool thing. And so what he said about it was, this is good for beginners. It takes you into Christ for a couple hours, but then you got to go back. It's best to just love like that. That's what he said, from the non-dual place. That's where it was all coming from. So, yeah, there wasn't anybody experienced. I mean, he jived Ram Dass because Ram Dass, when he went back to America, thought that he had tossed it over his shoulder. And wow, maybe he didn't really. So when he came back, he brought some more acid back. And when he came back, when we went back with him the second time, and then Maharaji, he brought it up and said, do you have any more of that? And then he took each tab, carefully put it on his tongue, closed his mouth and swallowed it. Yeah. So, and again, it was the same non-result because there's non-person experiencing. And that is the essence of mystical experience. That is the actual nth degree of what you see when you do take an entheogen and experience is that direct, complete interconnection with everything. And it's funny. I think Rick Doblin.
Yeah, very well.
Yeah, very well. So I did a podcast with him. He said, you people who originally took psychedelics that drove you to the East, and now you have been engaging in Eastern practices, either Hinduism, Buddhism, or whatever, Sufism, and you have not taken any entheogens in all of this time. Many of you have not. He said, as you get to that end stage of life, you might consider actually, and he was particularly talking about MDMA, because MDMA, talk about the connector, the interconnection of everything is so readily experienced on that particular psychedelic. He said that would be something that would be perhaps a great reminder at this stage of the game. I thought that was very insightful, actually.
Yeah, and he's done incredible work
Oh yeah,
as
absolutely.
well as that comment. And the comment with visiting Christ for a few hours is
Yeah, and then you got to leave.
gotta,
So, which is why Ram Dass went to India looking for a roadmap of consciousness because he kept coming down. He said, "It can't be, this up and down is not what it is not the core of truth." And that's why he went there and went through this whole thing using with psychedelics with Neem Karoli Baba.
and that's
And
a good,
yeah,
that's a great point for the audience as well, which that it's about the follow up work. You know, Houston Smith says famously, "A spiritual experience does not make a spiritual life." Paraphrasing him. So we both know that many people have had psychedelics. They're all not leading the most spiritually life. So it's about what you
Mhm.
do with it. And in this research, you know, we do embed the experience within a brief period of meetings, and then so far the experiences have sustained until people either passed away and the ones who are still living are still having it. So, and we're hoping to have more of these trials in the future. The hope is that within 5, 7, 10 years or so, this medicine is approved by the FDA for this, at least to start with this clinical application of people with end of life distress. And while it wouldn't be available in your CVS, it would be kind of following
Mm.
Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD, his vision of centers.
Yeah.
People can go, spend a few weeks, have some sessions with trained guides, and then return to their home, which we see in history as well in terms of the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece. There were these centers people went to experience the entheogen, and then return to their life, hopefully somewhat changed.
Mm. I think undoubtedly. I mean, obviously, everybody has a different path and a different circumstantial thing, basically karmic predilection. Uh, and you're right. Many people who took psychedelics didn't exactly do it with set and setting. Never mind in the atmosphere that you're operating in, and many people did not come out of it in a way that was positive in their life because of the intention that they had. Actually, Ram Dass and I did a podcast not too long ago, well, maybe last summer, uh, just about reinvigorating set and setting and really getting your intention way more in front of your actions. And because I mean, we are seeing as many next gen people that are coming to Ram Dass and coming to the retreats and coming to the website and to the podcast and everything that we do, that again woken up by psychedelics. I mean, there was a extraordinary. I mean, it feels so much like late '60s, early '70s now, in that way. And they're finding Be Here Now in college too, just like we all did back then. So I I I think it's really important, and I think we should probably do a little bit more around Ram Dass's wonderful relating of how you can have the proper intention and use the setting and the set and setting in a way that is going to enhance the experience beyond the moment so that it really takes action in your day-to-day life. So can you just talk about a little bit of the set and setting that you are working with?
I really want to underscore that. And by the way, set and setting, and so set refers to the mindset of the person, where personality, the social
Intention is involved there, yeah.
attention is lined up in that, and then the setting is where and how it's done.
Mm,
So a teenager taking a hit of acid in a noisy, crowded, chaotic parking lot with a band playing who's not screened properly may have been drinking, and all bets are off. What might happen, right?
yeah, right.
And by the way, set and setting. One of the original citations for it came out of a book that Ram Dass, then Richard Alpert, Ralph Metzner, who recently passed away, and Tim Leary the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but the psychedelic experience, their version of that, where they mention Set and Seti. It's one of the first times it's mentioned in that.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So it's still very important. And it's important to say that with proper set and setting, we've had no serious adverse effects in many, many cases across the sites. You can't say that about people doing it without that kind of set and setting and intention. So we meet with people for about 4 weeks prior to their session. They're screened carefully for a variety of medical and psychiatric uh, exclusion and inclusion criteria. Um, and we spend around 3 or 4 sessions getting to know them. And of all the modern features of science, the biggest uh, buffer against an anxiety experience is the rapport. One of the major buffers. Rapport with the guides, um, and trust the room, trust themselves. I tell them as they lead to the session, trust us, trust the medicine, and of all, trust consciousness. Trust the unfolding changes as they occur. And it is the single most important guideline for the session. Very often, early on in the session, people will encounter, as you know, can encounter dark imagery or dark experiences. And by avoiding those, it kind of only fuels that terror. But by going into it as you would in a vipassana or a meditative experience, staying with the unfolding, it changes like this to something typically transformative. In my personal experience of guiding sessions, I've never seen someone move into the experience, even in the very face of death, and not have a teaching or an insight develop if they go right into it. Including people who will say they died. They come to ego death, and then were felt reborn in this incredible, born again, which probably is what they meant back in terms of scripture, to be born again, have the death rebirth process. And I want to get back to in a moment about this aspect of love they experience in those moments. But setting is crucial. And then there's a follow-up integration period after the session. So that is important. It's important in life, and people often ask, what can we glean from these sessions for everyday waking consciousness? And I think that's one of them. That when shit's happening, as it happens all the time in this material world, by staying with it and looking into it, it may change. By avoiding it, it seems to kind of grow. Certainly in the psychedelic experience that we see that constantly.
Everyday experience, absolutely everyday experience. And everybody knows that. Everyone knows that. And the amount of awareness it takes and a bit of practice so you don't jump on that train, on that emotional or thought train.
There's a great quote in Mount Athos. Are you familiar with Mount Athos?
Mm-hmm.
There's a great, I was lucky enough to spend some time there a while back, and it's where these Greek monasteries are. But they're like, it's called the Greek Tibet. They're like, at that mystic core, there's no difference. Is that monastery a Christian monastery?
Yeah.
There's an inscription among one of the monasteries, the monastery of St. Paul, where it says, if you die before you die, then you won't die when you die.
Yeah.
And that's this. So people read that and probably think, what the hell are they talking about? But that's the experience we're seeing in the research. Some people have these ego death rebirth experiences, which, as Thich Nhat Hanh once says, actually quoting Christ, that we're born again into the light. We're born again into a new way of seeing. And as a scientist or a psychologist or whatever, to watch that in a clinical trial is incredible. It really reshapes how they die. It really does.
Wow. That's so great, Tony. And I know that given the atmosphere within which you are doing this, which is a university, and what's the in between from the spiritual side, these experiences that you're describing, and then the treatment side, where we are looking to help these people to get beyond fear and give them tools to move forward on a day-to-day basis. There seems to be a little, how is that being integrated?
The effects of the experience once they leave the study.
Yeah, I mean, once they have this experience, and then, you know, they're obviously not, this is, I don't know, how many times do these people do this?
They have a placebo, which is, you know, placebo, and then one psilocybin session. So that's
right.
Yeah.
So they have this experience.
Right.
So, yeah, how does it connect with the treatment side? Because obviously you're not leaving them hanging.
Right. So following the medicine sessions, there is an integration period, a follow-up period of weeks where we're still with them, exploring, talking about the experience. They do eventually leave the study within 9 months or, you know, leave the trial. People often ask what integration does. And so, you know, not one person is the same. Some people have this powerful, powerful experience where they report just being immersed in an aspect of consciousness or consciousness. And they're fully aware, and they report that there's no death. This body is just a vehicle and all that. And so the integration might be a little easier with that one. We're just supporting what happened and being with them for a period of weeks. But the important part of integration is to take what happened and apply it. It's tempting at times for people to think this is a drug effect. It was just a drug effect. That people don't tell us that. The ones who have it say, no, there's actually been a recent study done at Hopkins where people who had naturally occurring and or entheogenic induced mystical experiences report that experience of reality more real than this reality. So many people know that was reality. It's called the noetic quality. William James coined that term. That's one of the criteria. Encountering a sense of knowledge. But a lot of other experiences during their experience are things like forgiveness to people in their lives, people who've hurt them, trying to change the way they're living before they pass away. And not to leave that on the couch in the session room, but to go out and make it happen. So, you know, in AA, they make amends, right? There's this, it's sort of going around and trying to apply what happened, to apply it, to make it part of the practice. So, but then they leave the study. Now, we're fortunate we stay in touch with them, and about a third or a little more have since passed away already. So, it's a, you know, you get to know people very, very closely, and you know, as in palliative care, and I worked in palliative care, people you're close to that aren't there. So, and I want to just touch a bit on this aspect that, well, it's not scientific in terms of the data. It's what I think is driving the study in many ways. Is people talking about this love they get, and I try to always recall that because that is what they're telling us. I mean, we can show you charts and slides of depression, anxiety, all dropping, you know, and they are. The data looks wonderful. Qualitatively, what's happening? What's the phenomenology of the experience? And the thing that I'm most personally struck by, as we all are, is they experience the sense of love. One, loving kindness towards self, one towards other people in their life, including people maybe in early life who haven't treated them so well. But then this sense of love is the ground of being, to quote Paul Tillich. And I like the Greek word agape, this kind of divine love, and that's incredible. And you mentioned atheists, and I often mention a woman named Dinah when I talk about these experiences, who was an atheist. As I often joke, a broken atheist, which is a serious. That isn't like a Hawaii atheist. That's serious. But she had an incredible experience of being bathed in God's love. Her words. And she says to us, she wrote down in this beautiful journal, I don't want to say that because I'm an atheist. I don't believe in that language. But there are no other words to describe my experience than to say I was bathed in God's love. And I love that, the poignancy of that contradiction. And she was doing wonderful. She's a lovely woman. So, and, you know, love is a human word. We make these words up.
Yeah,
But,
right.
yeah, so these are human constructs, God, love, whatever we call this. But what's, you know, the $64,000 question, they're all talking about this essence or energies, as, you know, some of the religions call it. the Greeks call it the uncreated energy of everything going on. What is that somethingness? And when it's accessed, we're seeing fear of death reduce. We're seeing people become less depressed. In some Hopkins studies, people are stopping to smoke cigarettes. And other studies, they're addressing PTSD. So not only is it a way to have insight into the nature of self or being or reality, we're finding if it's accessed, we're seeing clinical applications for healing. So there's like a self-healing mechanism within us. That Raghu is just, it's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, another, love, that word is tough.
It's tough. It becomes an hallmark card. It gets so
Yeah, it's so much. So is guru. So is, there's so many terms from the East that are impossible.
Yeah, I love the path that say, don't even say the word God or love. Try, because it gets overused.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the word they use because for lack of any other word,
Well, I think putting unconditional in front of it, I think, is a good thing, because all the love that we are used to, and the relationships that we have and that we've had even from earliest memories, are conditional relationships, which is, Ram Dass in his talks goes, when I met this being and he told me stuff that nobody could know about myself, and then I'm sitting in front of him and I realize, shit, if he can do that, then he knows everything, including all this really bad, dark stuff that's in my head. And as he thought of it, he looked up at Maharaji, who was just beaming at him like, it is all okay, and he realized for the first time in his entire life he had received unconditional love in that moment. So that's it's kind of the conditionality that we operate on a day-to-day basis, which is another beautiful thing of entheogens, beyond, of course, the work that you're doing, for people to have that experience, and that completely shifts their lives when they have that, the conditionality, goes away. But you know what, I love trust consciousness. I want to call this podcast Trust Consciousness.
I love that.
Eh?
Perfect.
Really.
Perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you said it's all okay. Another other language we hear a lot is that so people are often weeping during these experiences for a variety of reasons. Dying or leaving people life. And when we ask them, very often the sentiment is that it was so gloriously beautiful, whatever this all is, but it's also so sad. It's also fleeting. We treat each other like shit. We hurt the planet. There's death, there's suffering everywhere. There's a word, kamolipi, I'm mispronouncing it actually in Greek. This joyful mourning or sweet sorrow, this combination of both ecstasy and melancholy or sadness, but in a sweet way. But in the end, they say, but it's all okay. Even with the wars and the death, and destruction, and the crap we do to each other, is it all okayness, as you just those words. But that's very touching, to hear that there's this transcendent sense of joy and eternal wisdom and acceptance, but they're keenly aware of the suffering all around them throughout time. I mean,
And
ages of wars and wars to come. Well, we live in a crazy time now. The zeitgeist we're in now is just
it's really beyond the beyond. And that's our ability to live on more than one plane of consciousness at the same time is absolutely a birthright.
Yep.
Right? So
and these experiences, I think, are birthrights. And the question is, maybe we don't have the answer. Why are they so infrequent? Right? It's an amazing question. They seem to be pro-social, pro-ethical, pro-species, continue, right?
Yeah, why?
Yet, here we are.
Fear.
And which is an incredible,
Loss of control, loss of power, all of it.
The book you must know, Richard Buck's Cosmic Consciousness, the great. He talks about his take on it, and it will increase with frequency as the species evolves. But there'll be more of these experiences, and to the point that could save the species. But we will see. It's an amazing time, by the way, to have these medicines come back, given the
Yeah.
current zeitgeist
Oh,
around the world
absolutely.
with authoritarian regimes popping up and the planet at peril.
Yeah.
That these return is quite interesting.
Yeah. I like somebody asked you one of these things that I saw online. Do you think these drugs and experiences are tapping into something innately spiritual about humans? And you say, yeah, it's a great question. And of course, yes, big time, yes. And it's stuff that Jung and Rudolf Otto and Abraham Maslow, they call the peak experience. And many people, when they have these experiences, by the way, and not just through entheogens, but also through meditation, which happened to me one time where I realized I had had that experience, that peak experience as a child, an 8 or 9 year old sitting on my bed one day.
Yeah.
And I know that many, many, many of us have that experience. And yes, it is, as we were just talking, it is certainly a birthright, right?
And they happen all the time. There's a recent Pew poll. 49% of Americans report having mystical or peak experiences.
Mm.
Now, they may not be the 3-hour versions you get with an entheogen, but they're the glimpses as kids we had, as walking through the woods, a variety of things, and you felt this temporary transcendent experience. Now, Alan Watts has a great line where he says, these occur all the time, but culture has pushed them out of context. Unlike in his book Island, where there's a social context to speak about it, if you're a kid, you're in your bed that day, you had that experience. I doubt you went down to your mother and said, "Hey, mom, I just had this incredible experience where I felt I left my body and I was
Yeah.
one with everything." It's as Watts said, it's pushed out of the spiritual landscape, which is not too well in the country. Um, so there needs to be kind of almost a spiritual, revival where these experiences are accepted as normal, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as the birthright. And I do, they seem to be the probably linked, taking a leap of faith here, to the foundation of consciousness. What
Mm.
is? That's the next, I think, the next step of science. What is consciousness?
Mm.
And are these
Right.
experiences somehow linked to the grounding of it?
Yeah. His Holiness the Dalai Lama certainly is, with Richie Davidson and these other neuroscientists, they are getting at that.
Yeah, which is exciting. There's one interesting thing that many, and no one knows, so we're a lot up for grabs here. But as you know, in the near-death experience, the experiences people have are very much like this. People who've died on the surgery table and returned to consciousness, they report the same experiences. So again, whatever that is being evoked. So some would say because of that, that's what happens. That's where we go. That's consciousness. Someone who could take the opposing view and say, no, it's just the dying brain generated this experience when it dies. My question to that would be, why would nature do that then? Why would nature be so, most things we're wired to do are for a reason to keep the species going, evolutionarily built in for a purpose. Why would nature wire us that after the species is dead, it gives us this incredible, loving, full of light experience? It wouldn't make sense.
No.
Versus the other viewpoint, that might be what's outside of the physical death. So the next 100 years will be interesting, fascinating with this research, as long as we keep ourselves going.
Yeah. Yeah. The socio-political atmosphere probably has to evolve a little bit, but we're hoping for that now, aren't we?
That's wild, huh?
Yeah. 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 We're nearing the end, but I wanted to ask you, what happens when you give psychedelic drugs to spiritual leaders? Is this article you sent me in Life?
Yeah.
What does
So
happen?
so I can't speak about the study per se. We're not published yet, and
You're actually in a study, or
I can describe this study in a brief sentence, and we're not publicly speaking about it. There's an FDA, and there's been something written on it, as you've seen. There are FDA clinical trials at Johns Hopkins and then NYU that are wrapping up now, but we're not published yet. Um, Administering psilocybin to religious professionals of different traditions. And it's not to heal anything, these are healthy people, but it's to have them help us understand the landscape of these experiences. How would they describe it? How do we all describe it? Qualitative research. The one way of measuring things in science was observing the changes. That might be a limited scientific paradigm in one way. The emerging paradigm might be the subjectivity, the subjective experiences of things, the phenomenology, the qualitative nature. So by mapping together lots of people's experiences, we're getting a fuller landscape of what are these. And what does it mean for people who specialize, spend their life studying religion and mystical experience to hopefully have one of those? How do they describe it? So stay tuned. I can't go into it now, but I could say that much. But it's very exciting, and we're all trying to keep our the culture now is embracing this work, but we want to keep it also very measured and not
Yeah, right. Not have
what
anybody.
happened last time.
Yeah.
50 years ago, this was very popular, and unfortunately, things changed. So we want to keep it in the scientific, rigorous realm for now, and plowing forward.
Okay. Well, you'll send me a note when we can talk about this, because it would be fascinating. It would be part 2 here of this chat.
I will send
for
you a note.
sure.
The subject will say trust consciousness.
Yeah. Part 2. Part 2. Yeah.
The end, the ending, the finish.
Yeah. Really.
There is no end.
Yeah. There's in that article, I just want to. There's one beautiful quote of a Dr. Craig Blinderman.
Craig's a very nice guy. Yep.
Yeah. He says a return to entheogens for the treatment of psycho-existential suffering.
Yeah.
And believe me, and we all know that we've all got psycho-existential suffering. This is not limited to 10 people or whatever. May signal that medicine has come full circle to embrace the earliest known approach to healing our deepest of human agonies.
Yeah.
I mean,
Great.
that is so great about, okay, anybody want to know why we are doing this and you are leading this charge, Tony?
And quickly on that note, that's a beautiful quote by Craig. This is a paradigm shift in how we use medicine. Every medicine we're all taking, your cardiac medicine, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, people's pain, they take it every day to get the desired effect. This is taken once or a few times. The drug's out of the system in hours. The experience transforms. Whatever that experience of all that is, the absolute, whatever you want to call it. That's a shift in how we look at medicine. It's activating whatever that self-healing mechanism is when we access a larger chunk of consciousness, whatever, and it's known by 1,000 names: the Tao, God, Christ consciousness, Buddha, nature, Sunyata. I mean, 1,000 names. It doesn't matter. A pure consciousness, but when it's accessed, it's to study it scientifically is stunning, and we're all very grateful. And I'm grateful for you for giving me this chance to.
Oh, no. I mean, this is a thrill. This is something I've wanted to get a little bit more into and discuss about. Hey, by the way, some of just thinking of the work that you're doing with spiritual leaders, with entheogens. So do you know who Mingyur Rinpoche is?
I don't think so. Tell me.
Okay, I'm turning you on. He is just the most wonderful Tibetan Lama. He's in a family. People are bored, by the way, Tony, of me talking about him. I have been talking about him week after week after week. He wrote a book called In Love with the World. He left his monastery. He's the son of Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, one of the great Tibetan masters of the last century and a half. And Tulku Urgyen had 4 sons, 3 of which, one is Mingyur, one is Tsoknyi Rinpoche, and one is Choki Nyima. And they are extraordinary lamas.
Wow.
And Mingyur in particular left his monastery and went on a 4.5-year went as a sadhu around India with a begging bowl, because he wanted to completely eviscerate his identity, his masks, all of it. And he was an advanced being, an advanced meditator. His father was just taught meditation, I think even to the Dalai Lama, stuff like that. So he was part of an experiment with Richie Davidson and other neuroscientists where they were testing meditative, what happened in the brain of a being like this that could go into called upon states and eventually manifest and you could see it in, in all of the readings and so on. So Mingyur, they would say, okay, meditate now on compassion, like that. Bing, everything went. I mean, they could measure. He was there instantaneously. Okay, they were blown away that any being could do such a thing, right? And to me, that leads us back to what we were talking about. This is our birthright.
It is a
This
birthright.
is obviously, and this Lama just proved it. Obviously, that became surface with him, not buried, surface. And this is our birthright. It is not the anxiety, depression, and so on that many of us relate to as me on a day-to-day basis. So that's another reason why these studies that you're doing are extraordinarily important.
You're gonna send me that link on that, but I'm gonna get that's a wonderful story. That's incredible. Yep.
Yeah.
And it is the birthright, and why there's such a separation is the age-old question. But that's the point of the practice, and yeah.
Well, keep on keeping on, Tony.
You too, my friend.
Yeah, this is so great. Thank you for being here. And on Mindrolling, part of the Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and catch all of these fantastic podcasters, from Jack Cornfield to Ramdas to Krishnadas, Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Gold. We have a pack of incredible people, Tony, on this network.
Murderer's Row of spirituality.
So again, thank you for being here, and everybody, we'll see you next week on Mindrolling.